Oh, now Cincinnati, what a team, what a team, what a team. And lady, from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream. Hello, Reds fans. Today, Jack Greiner and I have a very special guest as we veer off script a little bit from our lifelong Reds fans to a lifelong baseball fan, and in particular, a Brewers fan. Scott Sweeney has an interesting life story. Scott graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, serving 6 years in the Army afterwards, including tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So, Scott, as they say, thank you for your service. Upon getting out of the military, he worked as an engineer at Procter & Gamble. In 2021, at the ripe old age of 36, he took a huge gamble, at least I think so, and made a career change of sorts. Scott jumped headfirst into baseball. And you know, Reds fans like headfirst slides with the YouTube channel called Baseball's Not Dead, making videos about baseball history and statistics and baseball movies. I came across his most recent video, A History of Baseball Contracts, which is a fascinating and comprehensive history of the MLBPA, the Players Union, and the labor struggle between players and owners going back to the 1930s. He has a number of other very serious and very funny videos on his channels, and he does no endorsements except when he needed to help out some friends. Scott Sweeney, welcome to We Love Our Team.
Thank you. I feel I got a Brewers fan coming onto a Reds podcast, a Reds fans podcast. I got to give a little olive branch out. So when I worked at P&G, I lived in Cincinnati very briefly, but I do remember I started in March. In April, or as opening day was coming by, I had a bunch of coworkers that weren't really baseball fans, but then they all started talking about taking opening day off. And I'm like, that's a thing? Everyone's going to take opening day off, go to the parade. So I'd have to say, to throw out an olive branch, you guys do opening day the right way. So now can we get to the now I can bash the Reds the rest of the time.
Well, Scott, sometime our studio audience will chime in. We might even have my dog Murphy show up. Hey, so before we start, we talk about your YouTube channel. Why don't you tell our audience about your baseball fandom, and I guess in particular your Brewers fandom?
So I grew up in Wisconsin. I've been a lifelong Brewers fan, which, for my age, that means mostly a life of losing seasons. I think it was 93 was the first year I remember like sports and kind of like knew stats, knew how things worked. And that was the beginning of a 14-year losing streak until 2008. So a lot of disappointing seasons. Most people around that time were big Packers fans more than Brewers fans. But no, I've stuck with Brewers. They've always been my number one team. And I've always found baseball fascinating, which is how it operates different. Like NFL's an event every weekend. Baseball is a long, 180 days season with 162 games. It's a grind. There's so much emphasis on stats. There's so much emphasis on transactions and how everything operates. It's got the history for the labor union. It's got all these things that you can just dig into, and it's just fascinating to me. So that kind of just adds to the Brewers fandom of just overall baseball. I can dig into it for hours and hours every day.
Who were some
Scott,
of the
you're too young. You don't remember then. Or I guess the '82 Brewers team was before your time. But I've always been a Reds fan. But I have to say, I had a buddy in law school who was a big Brewers fan, and I loved that team. Harvey Keene was the manager, and the nickname for the team was Harvey's Wallbangers, which I thought was just great and
Well, it was
very appropriate.
It was easier for you guys to cheer for the Brewers back then because they were in the American League.
Exactly.
So not a direct competition at the time.
How about Robin Yount? Were you a big fan of Robin?
Oh, yeah. 93, that year that I was saying was the first year I remember sports, that was the first year of Brett Favre. That's how I remember. That's the year I remember because I didn't remember the quarterback that came before Brett Favre. But for the Brewers, that was the year of Robin Yount's 3,000th hit, and we actually went to that game, and it wasn't. We went to 3 games in a row because he was at 2,997, and it was a Saturday, or no, it was a Friday. It was a Friday, so we went up to the game, and every time we live in Madison, which is an hour away from Milwaukee. So every game we go to Milwaukee, and we'd have signs and everything, hoping that he gets his 3,000th hit. And he got 1 hit that Friday. So we go back to Madison, and we're like, well, the next day he might do it again. So we go back out to Milwaukee. We go to the Saturday game. He gets 1 hit that game, so he's at 2,999. And then so we decided, okay, we'll go to the Sunday game, but I'm not gonna take school off. So if he doesn't do it on this Sunday game, we're not seeing it. And it was, I think, the 8th inning of the game. He finally got a hit into right field. Brewers were up at that point. They stopped the game for 15 minutes. They did a whole celebration. What no one remembers is in the 9th inning they blew the game and lost it. But the 3,000th hit, he got that. I was there for that. It was one of my first big in-person sports experiences. So I always liked Robin Yount. I think the first game I ever went to as a kid, I was probably 4 years old. Robin Yount hit a home run. I still remember that.
Awesome. So I saw Robin Yount speak at an event at my high school a couple years ago, an alumni event at my high school, and he was great. And he told a story. He said, that weekend was a home weekend for the Brewers, and Bud Selly, the owner of the Brewers, called him in and kind of said, "Hey, you could get that 3,000th hit on Sunday just as easily as you could get it on Friday." So,
Classic
not a
Bud.
big hurry to get it.
Jack,
I love that story.
hey, Jack, that's just like Marge shot when Pete almost broke Ty Cobb's record in Chicago, and Marge was praying that he would go hitless on that Sunday.
Exactly.
And thank God he did.
What Pete Rose said, there's some lady in Cincinnati kicking her dog or something like that.
Hey, Scott, what about Bob Uecker? He's always been one of my favorite announcers, sitting up in the last row, and he's a funny guy.
Especially in the 90s, you didn't have every game on TV like you have now. So the summers would just be listening to Bob Uecker on the radio. That was when Major League came out. He had just come off of Mr. Belvedere. He was in that. And he was on all those Miller Lite commercials. Was it Miller Lite? Yeah, Miller Lite commercials. And he was on Letterman all the time. So he was just like a staple of baseball, for me growing up. Now he's a lot more. He's nearing the end of his career, but he still manages to announce every once in a while. So he only does some home games now, and he only does every other inning. But that's why the Brewers need to get a World Series as quickly as possible. Get one before.
He's like 90, isn't he? I mean,
he's up there. He's up there.
He's up there.
But he still got it when he's on the radio. I mean, he doesn't sound much different from, when I heard him growing up.
Everybody quotes that line from Major League just a bit outside, but I like the follow-up line. It doesn't get as much attention. He goes, "I don't know how the Yankees are laying off these close pitches."
He didn't really change his announcing that much for Major League because he does say just a bit outside, as a Brewers announcer all the time. Usually it is a close one. I think he just turned that into a joke for that. But he's a funny guy. You guys ever read Catcher in the Rye? The one by Bob Uecker?
Oh, no.
Catcher in the W-R-Y. It's just a whole bunch. It's a book he wrote, and it's just a whole bunch of funny baseball stories. I realized when I started that I said Catcher in the Rye. I didn't realize to say it's spelled differently.
He had that great quote about the best way to catch a knuckleball was wait till it stops rolling and pick it up.
Pick it up. Yep. I think that probably was in that book. Yeah.
It probably was.
Well, Scott, tell us a little bit about your military career. That's pretty impressive. You were in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, I went to United States Military Academy out of high school, and that means you commission as an officer when you graduate. I went into the Signal Corps, part of the Army, so that's communications and computers and networking and all that stuff. And my first post was Fort Riley, Kansas, and out of there we deployed to Iraq for 15 months in 2008, 2007 and 2008. Then I went to Fort Hood, Texas, and then I deployed to Afghanistan in 2010 for a year. And then once I got back from there is when I got out. But an interesting thing about 2008, because if you remember, I said the Brewers had 14 losing seasons in a row. That was their first winning season. And that was the year with CC Sabathia, which even non-Brewers fans are going, okay, I remember that. Like, see, they traded for him, and CC Sabathia put the team on his shoulders for the last 2 months of the year. But I was in Iraq at that time, so basically I would get up at like 3:30 in the morning because the game would be in like the fifth inning at that point. You know, the game started really late, and just see if they could win it at the end. And every once in a while, we had the Armed Forces Network. They had a rotating sports networks. Every once in a while, they'd have a Brewer game on. But I mostly did not see most of those games live, or see any of the playoff games live. Actually, the playoff games were on AFN. I could see those. But it was a lot of me sitting in front of a computer screen watching the in-play runs or in-play outs, like hoping, what happened? What happened? I need to know. Hitting refresh as much as possible for that season. I didn't get to go to my first Brewers playoff game until 2011, after I gotten out of the military. That was when they had the Ryan Braun, Prince Fielder years with Zach Greinke, and they made the playoffs then and made it to the how far did they make it that year? I think they made it to the NLCS and then lost.
So did you run into the military and other Brewers fans? I mean,
you run into in general places, but you run into a lot of Yankees fans. When I was at Fort Hood, you'd run into Rangers and Astros fans, but Brewer fans are pretty rare. In fact, Wisconsin's actually, as far as the Army's concerned, this probably isn't the case for the Air Force and Navy. Wisconsin's actually got a pretty, if you look at every Army base in the country, they're all 1,000 miles from Wisconsin. Like, Wisconsin does not have a Army, let's go join the Army culture. If anything, they got Air Force and Air Force more in Wisconsin. So it was rare to run into someone that was from Wisconsin, let alone be a Brewers fan. You run into a lot of Packers fans. Everywhere you go, you run into Packers fans. But when I worked at P&G, someone I worked with was a gigantic Packers fan that we'd go over, and they had like a whole Packers memorabilia in their basement, and we'd watch some of the Packers games there. So
the Packers, I mean, I think they developed in the late '60s I think they were America's team to a certain extent,
Yep.
and I know people who are older, this is when the Bengals were not around, that were Packers fans and have kind of kept that allegiance up. Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Scott, you were at P&G, you had a successful career, and then you decided to leave and start this YouTube channel. So tell us a little bit about that. That's pretty interesting.
P&G, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a career. I was with P&G for about 5 years. Started out in Cincinnati, and when I started there, I was only in Cincinnati for a year and a half, and then moved to Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Basically, they had this initiative where they wanted to put an engineering development hub site in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and we're trying to get as many people in Cincinnati to agree to move to Cape Girardeau. And everyone there, most of the people that I worked with in Cincinnati had lived in Cincinnati for 20 or 30 years, had families, had houses, and were like, we're not doing that. So they grabbed the new guy that is new to Cincinnati and has no ties, and they're like, oh, you'll move then. So I moved to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and then I left P&G near the end of 2020. I think part of it was just in Missouri, I was at a paper towel, toilet paper, and diaper factory. And if you remember during COVID, it made the news, the shortages and runs on toilet paper. And so it was basically that whole year was just chaos. And after doing military with deployments, being on projects for P&G, working very, very long hours, that year just broke me, where I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. So I was just going to take a sabbatical, going to take a year off, maybe 2 years off. And then as a side hobby, I started making videos about baseball, and then that kind of took off.
Wow.
That was not expected. I did not leave P&G like I'm going to be a YouTuber and make videos on. That was a hobby, and it just kind of took off in the last year and a half or so. So, which has probably made the sabbatical a little bit longer because once it takes off, you do make a little bit of money, not a ton, but you make a little bit.
Where in, I'm sorry, where in Missouri is Camp Girardeau?
Cape
Or
Girardeau,
Cape Girardeau, excuse me, Cape Girardeau.
southeast Missouri, so about 100 miles south of St. Louis. It's right on the Mississippi River. It's like, Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn territory, you know.
Yeah, the middle of nowhere. It sounds like.
Yeah, it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they got a city of 22,000 or something like that.
Well,
Well, that's what when people talk about the Cardinals, and I think as a Brewers fan and as Reds fans, we can share our. I think the one thing we probably have in common is we hate the Cardinals, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we can agree on
Oh,
that.
my thing is when I was living in St. Louis, that would be a problem. Oh, you're a Brewers fan, and my response would always be, yeah, but we both hate the Cubs, so it's okay.
There you go.
So
All right,
I
so we
could
have
I could
that
get along
shared.
with any Cardinals fans by saying, oh, we both hate the Cubs, and I could get along with any Cubs fans saying, oh, we both hate the Cardinals. So that
Exactly.
was always the way to go.
But that's the thing, you talk about like Girardeau. I mean, I think when people talk about St. Louis as not being a big market, that kind of bugs me because they have a huge geographical reach
Mhm.
into like, Arkansas and places that border Missouri that people don't think about. And I think, for so long, they were the farthest west major league team until the late 50s. And I just, it kind of bugs me. I think Milwaukee and Cincinnati are true smaller market teams. But when St. Louis gets lumped in there, I just think that's
Yeah,
great.
there were definitely a lot of Cardinals fans where I worked. I actually one guy that was actually kind of my boss was a huge Cardinals fan, and his son was doing travel ball, so he was like big into baseball culture and all that. And I had speaking of the 1982 Brewers, I had a program from the 1982 World Series, so I brought it into work for him. It was Cardinals versus Brewers. So I was like, hey, you'll like this. This is the program for the 1982 World Series. It was the most popular guy at work for that day.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So tell me, just I'm kind of interested in the mechanics of a YouTube channel. Like how did you get it started, and you know, how do you get it out there? I mean, Randy and I are jealous. We want to do something.
Algorithm is king. The algorithm is king. It's so basically um I started the channel on a whim in one day. It was I had been doing video editing for like I during my project during COVID. Everyone has a project, start a garden or do something. Mine was to delve into recording music. So I've been playing guitar for 10 years, acoustic guitar. I went and bought an electric guitar, an electric bass, brought a digital audio workstation, a bunch of microphones, and was recording covers of songs. And I started a YouTube channel for that just to upload covers of songs, just for fun. And for that, I had to learn video editing. I had to learn all these things. And I was doing that just for fun as a side little hobby for about a year. And then I had the idea one day of, hey, I want to do a video about baseball. It doesn't fit on my music channel, so I'll start a new channel. But the video it was very low effort video. Um, it was at Moneyball. The last 15 minutes of the movie is game 20 of the streak of the Oakland A's versus the Kansas City Royals, and they depict that in the movie with actors playing everything and all that. But the game's a real game. You can go and look up the broadcast and see the actual plays. You can see Mike Sweeney's home run in the eighth inning. Um, and then, so the video idea was, why don't I just show a side by side? Show an at bat from the movie, show the real at bat, and see how close they got it. And I didn't do any audio over it. I just grabbed the clips, put them together. It took me 5 hours to put it, threw it online, and um, and within 12 hours, it already had more views than all the music video stuff I'd been doing the previous year within 12 hours. And that wasn't even a lot. That was like, I was ecstatic that it got over 1,000 views. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Then 4 months later, there was the Field of Dreams game in Iowa between the White Sox and the Yankees. The one where Tim Anderson hit a walk-off home run at the end of the game. It was kind of a really exciting game, nationally broadcast. So I think what happened is people were looking up Field of Dreams, which leads into baseball movies, which leads to people looking up scenes from Moneyball, which somehow in all of that, in the algorithm, my video gets captured in that. And it went from 1,000 views to 500,000 in 1 week. And this is 4 months after it came out. Like, it was a complete shock. And I really I'd done a couple other videos, but they were all, 200 views, 300 views. It just caught the algorithm. And then from there, it just snowballs. It snowballs. Like, there are a lot of, now I'm in discussions with other baseball YouTubers, they talk about what we're working on and all that. And a lot of other people like chase trends. Oh, Ohtani's having a big thing. Let's make a video about Ohtani and gambling at the beginning of the year. Chase those trends because they get caught up in the algorithm and then it gets fed to people. And there's two key aspects to a YouTube video. First, can you get people to click on your video, which is like thumbnail and title? Do those hit the algorithm? And then the second key aspect, which I think has played into my channel really well, is do people watch the whole video? Like, do they click on it and go, oh, this is terrible, and click off it? Or do they click on it and watch it all the way through? If they do that, then YouTube's going to go, oh, we should put this in front of more people. It's basically one of the best, the way the algorithm is, it's one of the best free marketing tools out there. I could be making these videos and just releasing them on my own website, and I wouldn't get more than a dozen people watching them. But you put it on YouTube, it's a curse and a blessing. The algorithm can also shut channels down. People can have good careers on YouTube, and then all of a sudden they fall out of favor with how YouTube's feeding it to people. Like, oh, we're going to focus on short content now. So you guys that make the long documentaries, we're not going to feed your videos to people anymore, and their careers disappear overnight. And it's nothing that they did. So it's a curse and a blessing. Blessing can get you out there, get free marketing, get your videos put in front of people, and the curse, because that can change on a dime. And it can change video to video. I can spend hours working on a video, release it, and it does terrible compared to my other videos due to no fault of my own. Just the algorithm didn't like it. So.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. Was the documentary about the baseball labor situation, was that the longest one you've done?
That is the longest. And it is, so how I do my topics is I kind of just, whatever I feel like making at the time. And my intention was not to make that video when I started out. What I'd done is that my previous video was looking at arbitration extensions going back to 1975. And in order to do that, I had to research contracts in 1975 through 1995, which you can't find a lot of information online. I had to get a newspapers.com subscription and look up local newspapers, who's signing who. And in doing that, I was looking at hundreds and hundreds of contracts. I'd run across a couple weird stories. I'd run across Jose Rijo, who wasn't allowed to play polo in his contract, which is just that comes out of nowhere. Roger Clemens couldn't play JLI. There were some weird negotiations where one pitcher, his contract was lost in the mail. So there's all these interesting contract stories, and I kind of wrote them down. I'm like, I'm going to make a 15-20 minute video about interesting contract negotiations, snafus in contract negotiations. And then when I got started, I went, well, okay, to understand this one, you got to understand how arbitration works. So I guess I got to explain arbitration. To understand this one, you got to know how contracts were negotiated in 1960. So I guess I got to go into Ball 4 and Jim Bouton and explain how contracts were negotiated in 1950. To understand holdouts, you got to understand the history of that. And before you knew it, in the 2 weeks that I had been researching this and trying to put it together, I was like, I just bit the bullet and I bought Marvin Miller's memoirs. And then I started reading that, and I got a quarter of the way through it, and I go, this is its own thing. I set down that 15-20 minute video I was going to do on weird contracts. This is now its own thing. and I kind of went deep into research for like a month and tried to structure it so it kind of wrote itself actually, because every chapter builds on itself. It's not like they gained this right, that was the end of the story. They're chipping away at certain labor rights, getting certain things. Every year would be another step on that. Every year would be another step on that. So it really wrote itself like all the way through the '94 strike. Covering after the '94 strike was a little bit harder because there weren't any big impactful moments really until the closest is the 2022 CBA negotiations we had 2 years ago. So really, it I stumbled upon the topic and it was too good for me to pass up. And then the other difficult thing is if I'm going this deep into this important of a topic, I got to do it right. So I was contacting lawyers because I talk about Supreme Court cases. I'm
Right.
not a lawyer. I can't read a judgment in a case and an opinion in a case and really get a meaningful, okay, what does this mean? So I would try my best, but then I reached out to some lawyers. I'm like, can you review this? Can you review that? Am I on the right track here? And one of my biggest like achievements with this video, I consider, is whenever you release a video or something online, you're going to have comments of, oh, you messed up here. Oh, you said this name wrong. Oh, this is incorrect. This 2 hour long video's had 500,000 views now. I haven't gotten one comment correcting something factually wrong
Wow.
or something. So that kind of blows my mind because every other video I have, I got so many errors, like so many mistakes. I made sure I wanted to do this one right. So
Sweeney,
that's kind of how I got into it.
Scott, have you ever thought about doing a Reds video of some sort? You know, baseball's not dead yet in Cincinnati, and that's the name of your channel. How about like a video about the opening day parade and the tradition of the opening day parade?
Possibly. I've kept, other than me mentioning that I'm a Brewers fan in some of my videos, I've kept my channel based like team neutral. Like you wouldn't even know I was a Brewers fan if I didn't mention it once or twice. So before I do a Reds video, I do have probably one or two Brewers topics to cover before that.
That's
But
fair.
maybe 15 years down the line, I'll cover the opening day.
You know, I wanted to get back to it. You make an interesting point about how things are related, and you know the sort of the continuum. Like for example, I did a presentation this summer about the collusion in the mid '80s, and you know, in my research and that, I was a little surprised to find, but intrigued by the fact that that kind of stemmed from Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax
Yeah,
joining forces in '66
it's a
to
full through
negotiate their
line.
contract, and that freaked the owners out so much that in the one of the early collective bargaining agreements they put in the no collusion thing.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
Marvin
it
Miller
was to
said, "Well,
punish the player. Yeah.
that's fine, but you can't collude either." And it was that provision that allowed the players to challenge what was happening. I think had that not been in the CBA, I think the owners could have colluded. I don't think there would have been anything to stop them.
Yeah,
Not antitrust.
and there and in between that, like them doing the colluding is a direct response to the '81 strike, which basically, or the players had already earned free agency. That earned them basically. There's like no restrictions on free agency, and the owners have been like, when they got free agency in '75, '76, Messersmith and McNally, the owners tried for 6 years of like, we gotta curb this. We can't just make it unrestricted. Everyone's a free agent. They did get the kind of a win, which, although Marvin Miller says he wanted this anyway, of 6 years before free agency. Because Marvin Miller said if everyone becomes a free agent all the time, it would actually be the top guys who get money, but then you could find someone anywhere, so it would hurt the overall market for players. You gotta suppress the supply a little bit, and so that happened throughout that. But in '81, they were trying to say if you sign a free agent, you get a player from the team that you signed it from, and all that got shot down. The players won all of that, and the owners went, okay, we need to somehow combat free agency. Why don't we just get together and decide to not sign free agents? And
Yeah.
it was right around. Um, I think it possibly happened in 82 and 83, but it for sure happened in 85, 86, 87, 88. They just went and said, let's not sign free agents, make them sign with their original team for a lot less money. And there's a
Right.
lot of horror stories there.
Well, it's Charlie Finley when free agency first came in. That's what he said. He said make them all free agents every year, and it doing. And Marvin Miller was scared to death that they would do that. But fortunately for him, for the players, all the other owners thought Finley was crazy, so they didn't do it. But where did you
I think Marv,
get in your documentary, you've got an interview with Marvin Miller, and some older guy is talking to him, and it looks like it's in spring training. What is that? Where was that from? I was just curious.
Bill Veck. Bill
Oh,
Veck,
that's
the
that.
old, yeah, that's Veck, is interviewing him. I think it was about like 8 months before Veck died, actually. So Veck had just basically retired, and Marvin Miller had just retired, and so Marvin Miller, he in his memoirs he does talk about a lot of owners being buffoons, but he does call out Bill Veck as being like one of the guys that were much more straightforward owners. They didn't do backhanded tricks in negotiations, and he was a good friend of Bill Veck. Trying to remember, he also was actually good friends with Steinbrenner, surprisingly.
Hmm. That's surprising. No, I thought that interview was fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Just and there's a piece in it where Miller talks about collusion going back as far as the early '80s, and I think it
Mhm.
was Guidry. He talked about how clubs sort of backed off on going after Ron Guidry, and he was like, it just makes no sense. I mean,
Yeah,
it just makes.
he was a sharp guy. He almost um, one of the tough things on doing a historical documentary YouTube video like this is getting footage. And every time I stumbled across a Marvin Miller interview, it was like gold. I just put that, I saved that on my computer. I'm like, I am using this. And that interview, I think, was a 40-minute interview, and I used probably 10 minutes of it. No, maybe
Yeah.
not 10 minutes, but I used a good chunk of it because he made very concise points on what the concerns are and what the issues are.
And Bill
Yeah.
Veck actually testified for Kurt Flood in his case,
Yep.
didn't he? Along with Jackie Robinson.
hmm Yeah. So I think that Marvin Miller and Bill Veck are apparently friends, going back to then.
Interesting. Yeah. Did you read Brad Snyder's book called a well-paid slave?
I I I did not, but in my research, I watched the movie "The Curious Case of Kurt Flood," which
Yeah.
is basically based on that book. The guy that wrote it, he was interviewed for that documentary, and a lot of the clips come from him. So it's kind of yeah, there were some other, like when I was working on this, I was reaching out to other baseball people, and they're like, "All right, oh, you must be using this resource and this resource," and I go, "No, I haven't read those actually. Like I do a wide net, but you can only have so many books you read, so many documentaries you watch, so many interviews you watch. I think I hit enough where I'm like, I think I captured the essence of what was going on.
It is a great book, and
Mhm.
that whole case, it was just fascinating. Like Randy said, Beck and Jackie Robinson testifying, and Flood was represented by a former U.S. Supreme Court justice named Arthur Goldberg, and lost the case. That's where I think people don't always realize that unfortunately, it lost the case and probably cost got him blackballed, and he had a lot of personal issues, but you know, ultimately, one of the arguments that baseball made was that this was a matter for collective bargaining,
Mhm.
and that was kind of a case of be careful what you wish for, because when it went to Peter Seitz, as you mentioned in your documentary, he's like, yeah, this is crazy. I mean, because that's the thing. That's so interesting. It wasn't just the reserve clause; it was the way it was interpreted, which the owners, it was preposterous the way they interpreted it. I mean, it said, if you play out your contract, the owners, you can play one more. You're obligated to play one more year. But the owners kept saying, yeah, but then you're obligated
In
the next year
perpetuity.
and in perpetuity. And it was like, I think Peter Seitz just looked at it and said, "What are you talking about? This is."
No, the and this is also, I'm gonna say it, something dangerous.
Okay, Scott, you want to finish that thought, and then we'll do
Yeah,
some word
I was gonna say
association.
something that could make me some enemies on a Reds
Uh-oh.
podcast. but I do think Curt Flood is the biggest Hall of Fame snub of anyone. Of anyone, yeah, I know what I'm inferring there. Just because no one has changed the landscape of professional sports as a player since Jackie Robinson more than Curt Flood. It's people look at his stats and go, oh, but he wasn't that great. If Jackie Robinson was a replacement level player, he still would have been in the Hall of Fame for what he did being a pioneer. And Curt Flood, it's a shame. I mean, they didn't even put Marvin Miller in until 5 years ago.
He was
After
dead.
he was dead.
He was dead after he died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I will definitely be coming out with a video whenever the Veterans Committee has their next covering that era vote. I'll be definitely campaigning for you got to put Curt Flood in. Like it's ridiculous he isn't.
Yeah.
Okay, let's play some word association. How about Scott? We'll throw out a Cincinnatian, Marge Schott.
Marge Schott, St. Bernard's. I gotta say the word association St. Bernard's because I learned if you can't say anything nice, talk about their dog.
How about Hardball?
Hardball. That was a sitcom that I did a video on that came out in 1994 about baseball during the baseball strike, the worst timing possible. But the word association would just be it's bad. It's really bad. I remembered it being bad as a kid, and that's why I made a video on it because I'm like, it took me 3 months to get a copy of the show because they basically tried to delete all copies from public view.
Who was in it? I sort of vaguely remember the title, but I can't.
Yeah, it was Joe Rogan before he was even before he did Fear Factor. It was before Fear Factor, before MMA. It was his like basically first acting job he ever did before news radio. So
oh wow,
yeah, it's just a bad show that came out during the baseball strike, so people weren't even energetic about baseball at the time.
Your video is hilarious on that. Jack, you want to throw out a word or name?
Analytics.
My knee-jerk reaction is it's competitive advantage. The teams that embrace it, they get a little bit of a competitive advantage on those things. I do know that that a lot of fans think it makes the product work worse. It makes baseball less exciting. But if you want to win baseball games, you got to get those little advantages like pitch framing. Like there are teams that embrace it. There are teams that don't. And the teams that embrace it, they get an extra 5 strikes per game, which adds up over a whole 162 game season. So I do think it's become the boogeyman for a lot of people of like, oh, this is ruining baseball. But if you really delve into the analytics aspect of baseball, it opens so many doors of things you learn about baseball that you never even thought about before. And it makes every interaction you see on a baseball diamond fascinating. I watched a 5-minute video today by John Boy Media comparing 2 catchers positioning 1 foot apart and how one of them got all the calls and one of them didn't. And they have coaching staffs dedicated to just getting these little small advantages. And so I find it fascinating.
Speaking of analytics, how about Joey Votto?
Joey Votto. Word association with him, chess. And that may throw some people off since he's a future Hall of Fame baseball player. But in, I think, 2022, he started doing videos online of him going to chess tournaments. And I was going through a big chess phase at the time. And one of my bucket list things, I don't do interviews. I haven't done any interviews on my channel. But if I could ever agree to do an interview with Joey Votto over a chessboard, that would be a bucket list thing. I would go buy out I get a nice camera and a setup and a little studio and I'd fly out to Cincinnati tomorrow if Joey Votto contacted me and said, yeah, let's sit down to a chess game. So
he'd probably do it. I would not be surprised.
I know.
I bet he would do it. I bet he would
too, but I think so many people contact him on social media trying to do
it's
things
hard
that
to get through the noise. Yeah.
So if you guys have an in with Joey Votto.
One more word association, at least for me, is Craig Counsell.
Trader, obviously. So Craig Counsell signing with the Cubs, and he did it for more money. I don't hold that against him, really. The worst part about the whole thing is he's from the Milwaukee area, and when he was first became the coach of the Brewers, he put out this whole video of like, we are Wisconsin. This is my hometown thing. It's my dream job. I'm here because I'm Wisconsin as well. And then 3 years later, going and signing with the direct rivals, the biggest rivals of the Brewers, really gives a bitter taste. But I don't hold it against him. I do realize, being big into labor negotiations and the history of all that, someone signing with another team for an extra $3 million, regardless of that team, who that team is, I get it. But I'm not going to cheer for him.
How about
like Leo DeRocher? Leo DeRocher went from the Dodgers to the Giants in back in the day, so it's kind of similar.
How about baseball movies?
Oh, baseball movies. So there's a lot of there's like categories of baseball movies. There's the really, really good ones, which there's a handful of. You got the Bull Durham and Major League and all that. There's some that are interesting and have their heart in the right place, like we're celebrating baseball, that. And then you got a lot of junk. So that's why I made a video kind of going through all the baseball movies, which, people always talk about maybe the 10 best ones. They never talk about all those bad ones. There's a lot of bad baseball movies. So I'm actually doing a follow-up to that video, like working very slowly in the background. I've been working on this for like a year now. But I did a video on reviewing baseball movies based on how well the actors played baseball. But I only covered movies from 1984 to 2024. So I've been working on a video of covering all of them before 1984. And there's a lot of bad baseball movies before 1984. The most surprising thing is one of the worst ones in the last 30 years was The Babe, I think. It is bad.
It's terrible.
Not even the worst Babe Ruth movie. The Babe Ruth story that came out like the year after he died,
with William Bendix,
is probably the worst movie ever made. It is. They did not want to tell the story of Babe Ruth. They made him into Jesus, like a Christ-like figure. There's actually a scene where he walks by a crippled child and the kid stands for the first time in his life. That's an actual scene in the movie, so he can heal cripples.
That's awesome.
It's so ridiculous. It was like, he just died, let's make this, he's an amazing person movie.
Well, I got to ask you, if you're talking bad baseball movies, ESPN did a movie about Pete Rose. Did you see that one?
I did look. Yes, I didn't include it. I'm trying to remember why I didn't include it in my review. I think I didn't include it because they didn't actually show much baseball action at all.
Yeah,
enough
they
for
did.
Me. So I did like have a line of, you got to have like more than a minute of baseball action for me to include it on the list.
Yeah, it was god awful. It was just so bad. It was unbelievable. Mr. 3000 was not much of a movie either. No offense to Milwaukee Brewers, but
how about Field of Dreams? Is that in your top 10?
It's up as far as, so I always got to separate. This is when people watched my video reviewing the baseballs by how well the actors play baseball. I got to separate. That's not how good the movie is. So I rated Field of Dreams like, I don't know, 12th on that list. But as far as best baseball movies, it's a very good baseball movie. It tells a couple really interesting stories about baseball and kind of comes together in an emotional arc at the end. So I like it. It's very good.
Well, we're running up on time. We just were curious, your thoughts on the ability of small market teams to compete. Obviously, I think Milwaukee has shown us that it can be done.
It can be done.
Yeah.
So I have 2 points on this question, and tell me how much time I got, because I could go on for ages. But first, like I said, I grew up with bad Brewers teams for decades basically, and for me, the whole difficulty a small market team has in competing in Major League Baseball with how the finances work and everything like that, for me, it's a feature, not a bug. I absolutely enjoy looking at every Brewers transaction they do and all that, and seeing how they can squeeze as much value as possible. As opposed to, I feel sorry for Yankees fans. They're like, oh, let's just get Juan Soto. Let's just get the best player on the market. Whoever the best three are, we should sign all three. There's no thought. There's no process about it. It's just get the best players, throw them on the field, and small markets like the Brewers can succeed if they do take advantage of all those little things. Pitch framing, as far as I'll give you one example. So the Brewers from 1975 to 2015. If you look at their international amateur signings, these 16-year-olds who signed out of the Dominican Republic and foreign countries, they have the worst track record of any team. Like you look, I did a comparison between the Dodgers, who were the best at doing that, and the Brewers. The Brewers' best international signee in the history of the franchise is an Australian named Dave Nielsen, who you might not even know. Like they've had no Ronald Acuñas with the Braves and all that. And it's because they're trying to spend the same amount of money in the Dominican Republic as these other teams. And they can't keep up with them. They don't have the bottomless amount of money that the Yankees have. So what they did is around 2015, they said, we can't compete in the Dominican Republic. They went to Venezuela and they started scouting, a country that no one else was scouting, and signing a bunch of players from Venezuela. And that was back in their 16-year-olds are signing in 2015. It's starting to pay off now. You see Jackson Churio on the Brewers. He's Venezuelan. If you look at their top 10 prospects, 4 of them are Venezuelan. So they realized every team is doing this. They're focusing on the Dominican Republic. Let's go to other areas that other teams aren't looking and get value that other teams are overlooking. That's just one example. I could go into like 15 different other things that they've been doing. Like how they address the draft is completely different from every other team. But it's interesting for me. That's like the kibble of baseball transactions and every year, and seeing how they can construct a roster without spending $250 million.
That's fascinating. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's
You
awesome.
can't do it like everybody else. I mean, that was sort of what Moneyball was about. You can't play on the same field, so you got to find a way to do it.
They went and gave a 20-year-old Churio a 10-year contract, before he'd even played a game in baseball. Those are the moves they have to do.
Yeah.
Well, hey Scott, this has been a pleasure today. This has been great.
Fun.
Your channel is great. The audience ought to get on YouTube and check out Baseball's Not Dead. I think they'll be fascinated. There's a variety of topics. So we really appreciate you taking your time this morning, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Scott.
Now,
Hey. Just can't hold the crowd down, Scott, sometime. Come on, people. Settle down back there.
Cincinnati, what a team, what a team, what a team. And lady, from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.